Hi everyone, I'm Chef Susie and welcome to our live session this morning. Today we're going to be making French bread, and this classic long loaf, it's definitely something that we've probably all had before and seen, but I'm not sure if you've made it. It's super easy to make, just a few simple ingredients. We just have flour with some yeast and sugar, a little bit of salt and some water, and ready to go. And the French bread has a nice crunchy crust on it because there aren't any things in this dough to make it an enriched dough. There's no fat from milk or eggs or butter, just basically water, a leavener, a little bit of salt and sugar, and some flour. And it's going to be a chewy bread too. And sometimes with the French bread, you'll see holes and a more open crumb and more pockets on the inside, and that's because there's a little bit more liquid in it. So you're really going to love it. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so I've got some cake yeast here, and what we're going to be doing is we're just going to dissolve this in some warm water. And we're going to add a little bit of flour to this, and then it's going to be set aside, and you're just going to look for this to foam and become active, and then it'll be ready to go. And it's just going to be added to the flour that has a little bit of salt in it. And please let me know if you have any questions. So I'm just adding my warm water. You can use dry active yeast instead of the cake yeast like I'm using. Okay, so once this has dissolved, we're going to add a little bit of flour to this, and it's just going to thicken it a little bit, and we'll set it aside for maybe 5-10 minutes at the most, depending on how warm your kitchen is. And we're just going to look for this to just kind of foam up a little bit, and we're just going to be looking for some activity. So we've got a little bit of flour. Just going to thicken it a little bit. And it's starting to get a little frothy already, but we'll set it aside. And I've got a little bit of this mixture that I made earlier, so we're going to go ahead and grab that. Okay, so that's it. Okay, so I have some of this yeast and water mixture that I made earlier. I added a little bit of flour to it just to thicken it up, and it also has a little bit of sugar in it for a little bit of food for the yeast. So we're going to go ahead and we are going to be adding this to our flour, which we have our salt in here. And I'm going to start this out on the mixer using the paddle attachment. Once it comes together, then I'm going to switch over to the dough hook. And please let me know if you have any questions. Okay, so in goes our yeast and water mixture. And I'm just going to go ahead and get this mixed up a little bit. If your mixture is if it's a little too sticky, you can add a little bit of flour to it. Let's go ahead and take a look at this. And what we're going to be doing is we're just going to combine this. I like to combine mine with a paddle and then switch over to the hook and really get some kneading going on. Okay, seems like sometimes when you start with the hook, it just kind of pushes things around and doesn't really get incorporated quickly, and there's not a lot of kneading. Let's go ahead and switch over. Okay. So we're just going to be mixing this on like a medium speed. And get some kneading, and that's what's going to give this bread its chewiness. Okay, we're going to turn it up a little bit. It's coming together, it's forming a ball. And now we're kneading and we're working the gluten, and that's protein in the flour. And that's what's going to give the bread its elasticity. And it's going to give it that classic French bread chew. Okay, it's almost ready to go. And then put it out on the bench when we're finished, and we're going to knead it just a little bit. Okay, so our dough looks perfect. It's not too sticky, it's not too dry. Like I said, if you see that your dough is a little bit sticky and it's not forming kind of a ball like this, you're going to want to add a little bit more flour, but not too much. You don't want to dry it out. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit of kneading. Not too much flour, because if your dough is sticky, then you're going to want to add a little bit extra flour. So once we knead this a little bit, we're going to set it in the bowl and just going to proof. And depending on how warm your kitchen is, that'll determine how long it's going to take. So you're just going to watch for this to double in size. Okay, so it's coming together nicely. It's a nice elasticy dough. It's going to have some nice chewiness to it. So we're going to go ahead and put this in the bowl, and we'll cover it, and we're just going to leave it proof until it doubles in size. Okay, so let's talk about the dough once it's proofed and doubled in size. Once that happens, we're going to bring it back onto our board, and we're going to knead it again, and we're going to let it proof again. And then after the second proof, that's when we're going to actually form the bread. So this dough has already been proofed twice. And we're going to go ahead and actually form our classic French bread loaf. Okay. So once this dough has it's had a chance to proof, it kind of relaxes a little bit, and it's not so tough as when it's first mixed. So you can form it a little bit easier. And what you're going to want to do for the classic French bread shape is you're going to either press or roll a rectangle. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You just want to have that rectangle shape. And then what we're going to do is we're going to be rolling this. And then we'll pinch the seam, and then we'll be ready to proof this. Okay. Looks good. It's a nice rectangular shape. If you're going to be using a classic French bread pan like this, be careful not to make the loaf too big. You don't want it to go over the sides. But you can also make this on just a parchment-lined cookie sheet too. So keep that in mind if you're using a classic pan. Don't make it too wide. So we've got the rectangle shape, and we're just going to roll our bread. Some people like to roll these a little bit thinner. I like to keep mine like a 1/2 inch thick. You can roll it thinner if you like. And then this is our classic French bread shape. What you're going to want to do is pinch these edges. That kind of holds it together. Okay. All right. So let's talk about what we're going to do with this loaf next. Okay, so there's a few things that you can do. You can put this on a parchment-lined sheet pan to proof, and then you can go ahead and bake it right in that pan. And by proofing, I mean doubling in size. Okay, so another option too is you can put it on a cloth or even a piece of parchment paper, let it proof, and then you can transfer it over to a classic French bread pan, which is what we're going to be doing with this one. Okay, So I've got a loaf that I made already, and it's already proofed. So we're going to go ahead and bring that over, and we're going to take a look. Okay. So we have a classic French bread loaf here, and I made it earlier, and I put it on this towel, and I put a little bit of flour on here so it wouldn't stick. You can also use parchment, and I covered it up too so it wouldn't get too dry. So this one that's proofed, we're going to carefully move it over to the French bread pan. Okay, so we'll put that little guy on there that we just made. Okay, so this is a classic French bread pan, and these are about maybe $20. This is a nonstick pan, but I put some spray on it earlier. Even when I have nonstick, I have a tendency to spray those as well. So the holes in the bottom of this pan are going to ensure that the bottom of the loaf is very crispy, and it's going to help it retain its circular shape. But if you don't have a pan like this, if you don't want to invest in one, you can easily just bake your loaf on a cookie sheet or a half sheet pan with some parchment on it. So let's go ahead and transfer this loaf onto the French bread pan. So some people roll the loaf, but you have to be careful to get the seam on the bottom. So what I usually do is I just carefully pick it up, and I try not to squeeze it because it's got some nice air in it from proofing. But you can easily pick this up, or you can kind of practice rolling it as well. But make sure that if you're putting this on the towel in the beginning, make sure that you have enough flour on here like I have. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to kind of move this one over into this floured area, and we'll cover this one to make later. Okay, so that's a classic French bread loaf. Okay, so once you have your loaf in your pan or on your sheet pan, and don't worry if it looks a little off, because once it bakes, it's just going to look amazing. So what you're going to want to do is brush this with some egg whites. Some people will brush this with an egg wash, which is the whole egg, but I like to use just the egg white. This is going to give it kind of a shiny crust. It's going to help with the crispness, and it's going to help with it not get too brown. So if you use egg wash, it's going to brown a little bit more. And I like to bake mine a little bit longer and let them get dried out, nice and crispy on top. So that's why I use the egg white. So if I were to recommend, I would say use the egg white. Okay, once you get the egg white on there, you're going to make the classic marks for the French bread. You're going to cut it maybe 3 or 4 times with a wavy edge slicer. And this is going to open up in baking. So be careful not to cut this too deep. I'm going about maybe a little bit less than a ½ inch deep. If you're having any trouble with sticking, what you can do is you can spray your knife with some cooking spray, some pan spray. But I kind of just like to kind of go back and forth and get my knife in there. So this is the classic French bread loaf. It is all ready to go in the oven. You're going to bake this at a really high temperature. You're going to bake this at 425. And a loaf this size is going to bake for about maybe 30 minutes. So keep an eye on it. And for the French bread, it's not necessary to put this pan on another pan. You can just bake it like this in the oven. You will find if you put this pan on a cookie sheet that you're not going to get enough browning on the bottom. So go ahead and just put this on your oven rack just like this. Keep an eye on it, about 30 minutes, high temp, 425. That's going to give it its classic, nice, crispy crust that we all love from the French bread. Let's go ahead and set this aside, and we'll take a look at a loaf that I made earlier. Okay, so I've got a loaf that I made earlier, and it looks beautiful. It's a nice golden brown color. As you can see, the slits open up a little bit. I have a tendency to bake my French bread just a little bit darker. You can go a little bit lighter with this, not too much, but I like it to have a nice dark golden brown crust because I like the crispiness with the chewiness on the inside. Let's go ahead and take a look at this, and we'll take a look at the inside. And please let me know if you have any questions. So I'm just going to cut a slice. And we'll take a look at the inside of the French bread, and it looks great. And there's a few little holes, and that is from either forming this or it's from the liquid, which gives it an open crumb. But it looks great. That's exactly how it should look on the inside. So your French bread is great, you know, to just eat with some olive oil and some herbs and some Parmesan cheese. You can use your French bread to make some things like a submarine sandwich, or you can also cut some slices and toast them and make some nice appetizers. Put maybe a little bit of meat, a little bit of cheese, a little bit of maybe herb cream cheese. And my favorite thing to do with the French bread is, especially in my French bread that's a few days old and I'm not going to use it for dipping or sandwiches anymore, I'll cut some maybe 1-inch pieces and I'll make the classic French toast with my French bread. So keep that in mind. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.